like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Thanks again for your service. General Nakasone, thanks so much for your 37 years of service to our nation. I'd like to begin with you. There are some that would assert that other nations conduct cyber operations. Some of those things could have consequences on entities like hospitals and water systems and power grids and other civilian targets. What makes the PRC activities like embedding latent malware into systems, what makes it unique in relation to other responsible cyber actors?
Responsible cyber actors of democracies like our own do not target the civilian infrastructure. There's no reason for them to be in our water. There's no reason for them to be in our power. This is a decision by an actor to actually focus on civilian targets. That's not what we do.
Let me ask this too. The ranking member talked about attribution, determining exactly who was behind the cyber attacks, and then making sure that there are repercussions for those actions. I would argue too, it's not just about us playing defense, because we will never get out in front of the insidiousness that happens with cyber attacks and those folks that dream up ways to attack our system. But one thing that we can do very effectively is to have a very robust offensive capability as a deterrent, so that folks understand, like China, that if there is a cyber attack on this nation that goes after our critical infrastructure, that what will be coming back their way will be orders of magnitude greater. First of all, do we have the capability to do that? And if so, do we communicate that in various ways so that China knows what the consequences will be if they take such an action?
We do have the capability, and we're very, very good, the best. And in terms of the way that we communicate it in many different ways. From our policymakers who have these discussions, to the exercises that we conduct, to the real-world examples that we do with a series of different partners. The other thing that I would tell you is that, first of all, is that we have discovered what they're doing and we have exposed it. Secondly, the partnerships that exist here between our agencies and our commands is something that concerns the Chinese. And finally, it's the work with the private sector that gives us scale. They may have 50 to 1, but when we have the private sector, we outnumber them.
So, Nakasone, I'm also very concerned about the CCP pre-positioning within our critical infrastructure like oil and gas pipelines. Give me a reason why someone would pre-position in those critical infrastructure, and what conclusion should we reach as Congress and the American people from these reports?
As Director Easterly talked about, this is an attempt to provide the Chinese options in crisis or conflict. When we have discovered them in these critical infrastructures, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that we get them out. And the second thing is that we need to have a vigilance that continues onward. This is not an episodic threat that we're going to face. This is persistent. This is the generational piece that Director Wray talked to. We have to operate every day. We have to have a vigilance. We have to have offensive and defensive capabilities.
Director Easterly, you talked about holding software companies liable for the software that they've written for a variety of different sources, especially the electric grid. Give me your perspective on how we would most effectively do that. How could we do that in a timely way? How could we make sure that it's done in two ways to make sure that any future software that's written is held liable for its vulnerabilities, and how do we retroactively then address software that's already there that exposes those liabilities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As you pointed out, this is both a current problem and a legacy issue. Yeah. What is critical is that we start now to develop a regime, and this was part of the National Cyber Strategy, that can actually hold software makers liable for creating defective technology. Because frankly, I believe if we had something like that, and that was put in place at the dawn of the internet and when software was developed, we would not be in a world where the internet's full of malware and software is rife with vulnerabilities. So we need a software liability regime that's based on a measurable standard of care, but also safe harbor for those software developers who do responsibly innovate by prioritizing security, not speed to market, not cool features. So that's really important and a place where Congress could be incredibly helpful. We also have been working directly with industry. As General Nakasone pointed out, the force multiplier of having their presence in all of these discussions, industry, to put a priority on secure by design software as well as international partners. The last thing that I'd say is we need to ensure that individual consumers are also aware that they need to be asking for products that are secure by design and not defective. We are making things too easy for our adversaries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Castor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today and everything you do to keep Americans safe. Director Easterly, I understand a high percentage of cyber attacks in the U.S. are in the energy sector. How would you characterize the cooperation, the proactive nature of public and private entities across the energy sector?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So as the National Coordinator for Critical Infrastructure Resilience and Security, we work with what's called sector committees, essentially, that have representation from critical infrastructure owners and operators. One of the things that I found most impressive since I came into this role is that the energy sector, the people at that table are CEOs. And you do not see that across every sector. And that really shows that CEOs in the energy sector understand this issue and understand the need to make significant investments in their cybersecurity and in their cyber resilience. And so that is a very positive thing. We have catalyzed very good working relationships across the sector, and of course, with the Department of Energy and CSER, which handles all of their cyber work, to ensure that energy companies understand the threat. We did this very aggressively around the Russian invasion of Ukraine as part of our Shields Up campaign, but importantly, understand the steps that they need to take to reduce risk to our energy grid.
And the grid across the country is an aging, and often in many places it's decrepit, and there's a lot of innovation going on. There are a lot of new clean energy sources coming online. There's innovation in distributed systems. I think of after Hurricane Ian hit Southwest Florida, the subdivision, the neighborhood that had a distributed system that didn't go off grid. They had backup power. Are you thinking ahead, working with Department of Energy on how to build those more resilient systems where you're not as dependent on volatile fuel sources, you're thinking about the cyber attacks, but also long-term resiliency? How is that working, and do you have any recommendations for Congress on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that is the key word. We are living in a highly digitized, highly vulnerable, highly connected world where, frankly, it is impossible to prevent all bad things. It's impossible to prevent disruption. So we have been working with our interagency and our industry partners to focus on that resilience, to expect that there will be disruption and to be able to continue to operate through a disruption and to recover. And some of the exercises that we've worked on with our industry and our federal partners really double down on that concept. Incredibly important. To the point about the aging energy grid, it sort of goes back to Congressman Whitman's question about legacy infrastructure. We also have to ensure that we are investing in building resilience into the legacy infrastructure. It's a difficult thing to do. I'm encouraged that there may be some use of artificial intelligence to help us rewrite some of the code bases, at least in the technology world, where you have very sketchy code that is creating vulnerabilities. We could actually help to shore it up.
And do you want to say anything about these aging routers that Director Ray referred to with Volt Typhoon, and how are they targeting Americans, and what folks need to know?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So just to help folks understand, and my teammates can weigh in as well, when we talk about malware has been mentioned several times. This is actually not a malware issue. And that's why the name of that cybersecurity advisory was Living Off the Land. What these Chinese cyber actors are doing is essentially finding a vulnerability and then finding ways to live within a computer's operating system. So they're actually very, very hard to detect because they look like any other person who's operating on it, and they've elevated their ability to act like a system administrator. So you really can't tell that's a Chinese actor. That's essentially what they're doing on these routers so that they can build these large, essentially, botnets for command and control to allow them to have a launching pad on our critical infrastructure where they take advantage of yet another vulnerability. So the routers themselves may not be aging. They just essentially were created to be terribly insecure. They don't update their software. They allow for very insecure interfaces with the internet. And I think just today, at some point in time, CISA and FBI will actually publish what we call a secure by design alert, specifically for the manufacturers of routers and those small office, home office capabilities that Director Ray talked about, of the very basic things that need to be done to shut off the Chinese cyber actors from using these routers as launch points.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me also express my thanks to each and every one of you for your dedication to keeping our country as safe as possible. As you all know, there's an election coming up this year. The ranking member broached the subject, but I wanted to delve a little deeper into this notion of election integrity. You know, over the past year, we as a committee, we've heard from a lot of different experts. It's good to see you again, Dr. Easterly, on many of the emerging trends that we've been seeing in advanced technologies that are being used in misinformation campaigns. We've got deep fakes, AI, all kinds of social media and algorithmic types of warfare. You know, certainly the four countries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, keep coming up, but there's also a lot of non-state actors that we hear about as well. So I've got several questions, I think not directed to any of you, but all of you, if we have time to weigh in. So given the, what I would call ever-expanding nature of advanced technologies and all of these non-state actors' capabilities, what concerns you most about U.S. election integrity and the possibility of future election interference? Importantly for us to hear also, to adapt to these kinds of changing conditions, what policies should we consider amending, and which programs do you rely on in particular for resources? The General mentioned this, should the government expand its role in the public-private partnerships? And all of this, how does this all occur without infringing on the First Amendment, the right to free speech, and also each state's constitutional free and equal elections clause? And then just for people listening to this, this hearing, what gives you confidence and faith that in our ability to ensure free and fair elections? So I'll start with you, General Nakasone.
Let me start with the last part of your question, Congressman, which is we've done this before and we've done it successfully before. 2018, 2020, 2022, all of the agencies at this table have been working together. This is our fourth effort in terms of election security, and I'm very confident in terms of what we will be able to deliver, a safe and secure election. That's based upon the fact that not only has our methodology gotten better, but our partnerships have expanded. It's not just the partners at this table, it's the private sector. It's understanding internationally where we need to be able to partner and see what adversaries are doing outside the United States and do that very effectively.
It's a really important question. Thank you. So CISA serves as a sector risk management agency for election infrastructure security. So we lead the federal effort to support state and local election officials who are those on the front line of managing, administering, and defending election infrastructure. I have confidence because of the enormous amount of time that I've spent with secretaries of state, chief election officials, state election directors who work every day to ensure that they can effectively defend their election infrastructure from the full range of threats, from cyber threats, from physical threats, from operational risks, and from foreign malign influence. And I think what's incredibly important is for the American people to understand the enormous amount of work that's been done with our partners in the federal government, but at the state and local level and with industry to improve the security and the resilience of our election infrastructure. One thing to note that it's the diversity and decentralization of our election infrastructure, because it's managed by state, by 8,800 separate jurisdictions around the country. That heterogeneity gives it resilience. And there's also enormous amounts of controls, physical, technological, procedural, that keeps that infrastructure resilient. So the American people should have confidence in the integrity of our election infrastructure, and every American, if they have any questions about it, serve as a poll worker, serve as an observer, talk to your local election officials, and ask them questions. It's a transparent process, but everybody should support their election officials who are working hard to ensure the integrity of our most foundational democratic process.
Thank you. Mr. Ray?
Well, I would second the remarks of both of my colleagues. I will just add, in terms of things that we're concerned about, you alluded to the role of deepfakes. Obviously, AI will enhance some of the same information warfare that we've seen from our foreign adversaries for quite some time. We're also concerned about the ways in which misinformation, disinformation warfare, if you will, from a foreign adversary and cyber attacks can work in tandem. And I think, for example, about the Iranians' effort in the fall of 2020 that Director Ratcliffe and I did a public announcement about, where you had a cyber intrusion that was not as effective as the Iranians might have wanted others to think it was, but they had built sort of a disinformation campaign on top of it. We were able to expose it and largely render it ineffective, working with all of our partners up here. But that's the kind of thing that I think we will see more of. So what am I confident in? I'm confident in my partners. Americans can be confident in our election system and our democracy, but I am also mindful of the fact that our adversaries are getting more and more sophisticated, and that there are more and more foreign adversaries who want to get in on this game.
Thank you, gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's easy to think of the threat, not working. Maybe that would help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's easy to think of the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party as something far away. They may be carrying out a genocidal campaign against ethnic minorities in their own country. They may be building more nuclear weapons more quickly than any other country in the world. And they may steal secrets from our military and our private businesses every single day. But your testimony makes clear that what the Chinese Communist Party is also doing right now is positioning themselves to change the lives of every American in ways that we wouldn't expect every single day, to cut us off from our water or electricity whenever they want, to take control of our phones or our personal data, to take out the GPS system that we rely on that helps our kids get home. Those of us who see classified intelligence have seen China building these capabilities for years, but most of our critical infrastructure, our electricity and water and rail systems, they're run by state and local governments or the private sector. They may not understand these threats. So Director Easterly, how do we in the federal government ensure that these entities are protecting the system so vital to all of us? How do I convince a small town in my district like Marblehead, a town of 20,000 where I grew up, to invest in cybersecurity to stop the Chinese military? I mean, I'm all for holding software makers accountable, but if a water authority doesn't update their software for 10 years, that may be too late. So how do we protect ourselves today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have to attack it both at the software developer level, but then of course at the software user level. But as we know, many of these public utilities and even smaller critical infrastructure entities are target rich, but cyber poor. They might have two people who are focused on security, and they're the same two people who are doing administration or the finances for the company. And so one of the things that we've done with the support of Congress is built a very large field force of advisors and subject matter experts to be our frontline forces to work with all of the critical infrastructure owners and operators, the businesses large and small, to ensure that they are aware of the free services that we have that can make it easy on these entities to actually ensure their security and resilience. So very basic things.
know,
I think that a lot of entities probably don't know those exist, and so this is a place where we'd love to work with you on the committee to make sure these small towns.
that would be fantastic. CISA.gov, all our free stuff. But the other thing, just one last point, basic cyber hygiene. It's not rocket science. If they do the basics, they can stay safe.
Director Wray, you explained that TikTok is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, which can access users' private personal data, influence their feeds. Earlier this month, Cloudflare reported that Taiwan experienced a 3,000% increase in distributed denial of service cyber attacks last quarter. 3,000%. I imagine that's a coincident with their election. So the Chinese Communist Party has shown a willingness to influence elections. I'm heartened by the experience and competence of the federal government in protecting the integrity of our election system. But I mean, just to understand, if the CCP were to want to change TikTok feeds to bias one candidate or another in the upcoming presidential election, would they be able to do so?
My understanding is that under Chinese law, that would be something that they would be permitted to do.
And we already know they influence Chinese children to study science and math. Could they be able to suggest to American kids that they use more drugs?
Again, my understanding is that the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party, if it wants to exercise that authority, can easily exercise that authority.
General Nakasone, China describes its cyber efforts as proceeding along 4 vectors: deterrence, reconnaissance, offense, and defense. Deterrence, how do they think about deterrence, and how do we think about deterrence in response?
So in terms of the way that we think about it, Congressman, is we think about it deterrence by denial and deterrence by cost imposition. Deterrence by denial is what we're discussing here in terms of publishing and being able to expose what the Chinese are doing in an unclassified manner. This is the difference. This is the challenge China now faces. We have uncovered what they're doing, and we will continue to do that.
So as we uncover this, and I'm running out of time, but I want you to comment on one other thing, General Nakasone. It's clear from all we've heard, including the workforce challenges that Director Wray described, that we need more cyber experts to serve our country. Given the threats that we've laid out today, do you have a message for young Americans who might want to do something about this?
The future of our nation, the future of our economy is tied so closely to the future of our ability to operate in cyberspace. If you're looking for challenge, if you're looking for fulfillment, I would tell you that any of the agencies that you see here provide a mission and a responsibility that would dwarf your imaginable expectations. And I truly believe in the importance of national service, and I would encourage all Americans to think about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I feel like we could make Seth a colonel in the reserves or something. You know, you could take advantage of that. Mr. Molinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Director Ray, I wanted to follow up with you on some of the comments that you had made. In addition to the cybersecurity issues, you talked about the human sources, the insiders, corporate deception, Beijing hiding their hand in corporate joint ventures, and this whole topic of leverage and beholden to the CCP. When you appeared in October on 60 Minutes, you mentioned you had seen a variety of efforts by Chinese businesses attempting to acquire businesses, land, and infrastructure in the United States in a way that presents national security concerns. I saw that, and I thought that was a very powerful statement. I followed up with a letter to you outlining some concerns I had about an investment in my own district. In my own district, there's a company, Goshen, which is a CCP-affiliated company. It's worked with the PLA, and many of its top leaders, including the leader of its North American operations, have ties to the CCP. Goshen is wanting to build an electric vehicle battery factory in my district, and it's been given hundreds of millions of dollars in federal, state, and local tax dollars to do so. To build and operate its factory in my district, Goshen plans to bring 20 to 50 Chinese nationals to Michigan. If that happens, how confident are you that it will not be used for espionage? In other words, do you believe there's a risk these individuals will be spies working in the United States?
Well, I'd have to drill in deeper on the specific example to be able to weigh in on that. But what I can tell you is that a lot of this ultimately traces back to the blurry, if not non-existent, line between the Chinese government and its private sector, and their ability, the Chinese government's ability to, should they choose to leverage that authority, that reach, that access, in a way that undermines our national security, which is why acquisitions, buying land, buying businesses, and so forth, while maybe legal, can still raise national security concerns because it provides a vehicle for them to, if they want to leverage that access, to conduct surveillance or other operations that undermine our national security. And we've seen time and time again where they have used that access, leveraged that access to do that. And in a way, it ties into the operation that we're here talking about this morning, which is leveraging in a different sense. The access is the problem. We don't want to wait until they've actually stolen whatever the information is. We need to try to get, as they say in the counterterrorism context, left of boom.
How confident are you in the State Department's vetting process when it comes to Chinese nationals in this country?
Well, I'm not the expert on State Department processes, and I want to be clear, as I said in my opening, that our concerns are not just with all Chinese nationals. Our concern is with the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government, and the Chinese government has shown a willingness to leverage insiders who have no origins in China, for example. So vetting is a very important part of our resilience and our national security, but it's not sufficient in its own right.
Mm-hmm. So your concern is with the leverage. They could do that with Chinese nationals. They could use it with other individuals as well. What kind of leverage are you seeing right now the Chinese Communist Party using in this country?
Well, it covers the waterfront, right? So I'll give you one example that's public. So GE Aviation, a major public, very sophisticated company, entered into a joint venture with, it wasn't a Chinese company, but the Chinese were able to recruit an insider at the joint venture. The joint venture was then able to get access to sensitive GE information, which then he used to help Chinese intelligence officers back in China hack GE's systems. So you had the joint venture, which enabled the recruitment of the insider, which enabled the cyber hacking, and then for extra credit, the guy was able to essentially cover the tracks because of his insider access. Now, fortunately, there's a happy ending to that story because GE did what we want all businesses to do, had a good relationship with the FBI and our local field office, and we were able to essentially run a sting operation back against the Chinese, prevent millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars of R&D from being fleeced by the Chinese, and essentially lure an MSS officer who was involved to Brussels, where he was arrested, and we extradited him, and he's now in federal prison. That's what we need to happen more often, but it also shows that if a company as sophisticated and big as GE can fall prey to this, what company couldn't?
So GE did the right thing. If the company was a CCP-affiliated company, would they have done the same thing?
I wouldn't count on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the four of you for coming on out here today. I guess I want to just build on something that Congressman Moulton was talking about. Director Easterly, you talked about just the importance of being able to connect in with the different communities across our nation. I was very interested in what you said about the field force, of making people aware and organizations aware of the services that are being provided. And a lot of the conversation today has been talking about, how can we prevent some of this type of situation where we would have these vulnerabilities with our critical infrastructure. But Director Easterly, you also framed it, and I thought it was a very poignant way to frame it, talking about some of the concern of societal panic, I think is the phrase that you used, something that can be done against us that can very much damage our ability to operate, create that kind of concern amongst the American people that could sway political decision-making and weighing decisions in that way. So I guess I just wanted to ask the four of you, yes, we put everything that we can into trying to prevent something from happening. But God forbid something were to happen, some type of major disruption, whether GPS or something else of that nature. What kind of active planning are we doing in a whole of government way? Are the four of you brought into that type of coordinated effort for that kind of 0 hour, day after type of planning? I just want to have some sort of assurance or some sort of understanding of what kind of work you all are doing in that responsive way, not the preventative way, to tackle this issue and prevent that type of societal panic that you all were worrying us about. So please, wherever you want to start, Director Easterly.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And really, it's not my phrase, societal panic, it's the Chinese part of their doctrine, and it's a pretty scary phrase, frankly. But we are working very closely with FEMA, our partners in the department, and they are going to lead a whole-of-nation planning effort to ensure that we can respond to significant national security events. Now, this is, of course, building on years and years of national readiness plans and national response plans. With respect to cyber in particular, we were asked by the National Cyber Director as part of the National Cybersecurity Strategy to update the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, so dealing with massive attacks across the country. And we're working on that very closely with our government partners as well as with our industry partners, because as you've heard, industry plays a critical role in this because they oftentimes have the best information on what's happening in private critical infrastructure. So that connectivity will be incredibly important for us to catalyze an effective response if there is a major attack on our nation.
Okay. Mr. Coker, I just want to turn to you. How do you feel about our readiness and preparation in that kind of capacity? Are we doing everything we need to at the federal, state, and local level?
Thank you for the question and the concern. And while I am very confident that we're taking the steps that we need to, for example, I think you heard about some of the exercises that we worked with CISA on to prepare our sector risk management agencies for these types of situations. I am concerned that we continue to work with the state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. We've said several times today, they're on the front lines, these types of actions, and I view them as being a combatant commander, if you will, with many of us being supporting commanders. They're the ones who need our support, so it's part of our shift in the National Cybersecurity Strategy to shift the burden, the responsibility to those that are most capable. In this instance, it's the federal government that's most capable to prevent and then to lead the resilience in the case of an instance like this.
Okay. Well, look, I'd love to keep up with this because, I mean, look, in New Jersey, we have a lot of readiness in responding to the hurricanes and other storms, but, I just don't really feel like there's a lot of muscle memory and understand how to be able to deal with some of these other types of approaches. I'll just end with Director Easterly again. We're talking about the readiness that we need. I have a real concern about some of the funding discussions we're having here on Capitol Hill. Last September, House Republicans voted on a budget that would cut 22% to CISA. I guess I just wanted to get a sense from you what that would do in terms of our impacts and readiness.
It would have a catastrophic impact on our ability to protect and defend the critical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day.
Thanks for hitting home. Yield back.
Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses today for your valuable testimony and the work you do to help protect Americans on a daily basis. In particular, General Nakasone, I want to wish you continued success and a well-deserved retirement. I want to focus my remarks initially on the importance of reauthorizing Section 702 of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And as we know, Section 702 of FISA is set to expire here in Congress if we fail to reauthorize that program on April 19th of this year. And I would argue it's of existential importance to this country from a national security standpoint. And 702 is a crucial tool for providing the U.S. with the ability to target foreign people overseas to gather information that allows us to protect our citizens both abroad and here at home. And when we think about today's topic, the CCP cyber threat to the American homeland and national security, I want to direct my questions to Director Wray and General Nakasone. Can you talk or explain on how the information derived from Section 702, as we specifically focus on our topic today, aids in protecting our troops from China's malign activities in the Pacific and the U.S. effort to counter China's cyber espionage here on U.S. soil and our efforts to prevent transnational repression?
Well, I want to strongly second your comments about Section 702 and its indispensability to our national defense from foreign threats. Specifically in the context of today's hearing, 702 is the greatest tool the FBI has to combat PRC hacking groups. Just to give a concrete example, just last year, thanks to FBI FISA 702 information, we were able to identify PRC state-sponsored cyber actors taking initial steps to access a particular U.S. transportation hub. And we were able to quickly notify the entity and share technical details, which enabled them to be able to kick the Chinese off the networks before harm could be done, before some of the more apocalyptic scenarios we've been talking about here could transpire. That's the kind of thing that happens, frankly, not infrequently in our work. That is 702 enabling us to identify PRC malicious cyber activity targeting Americans, targeting American critical infrastructure, enabling us to warn victims, to notify them with details that enable them to take effective defensive action. And so, in my view, failure to reauthorize Section 702, or for that matter, reauthorizing it in a way that severely restricted our ability to use it, would be a form of unilateral disarmament in the face of the Chinese Communist Party, which I can assure the American people, the Chinese government is not tying its hands behind its back. It's going the other direction, and we need to do the same.
Thank you. General Nakasone.
Congressman, Section 702 is the most important authority that the National Security Agency uses every single day to keep Americans safe and to secure our nation. As someone who was at the Pentagon on 9/11, to consider that we would return to the days before Section 702, where we couldn't connect the dots, is almost inexplicable to me. The other piece that I would add to your question is 702 is so agile that it provides us an ability to see the Chinese precursor chemicals that are being used to feed fentanyl, which is the scourge of our nation. 100,000 Americans lost their lives in 2022. 702 allows us to identify those precursors that saves lives. The final point that I would offer is that of the surveillance authorities that are out there today, the most transparent, the most effective, the most important authority is 702. It balances civil liberties and privacy and the requirements of our national security.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for his incredible work on that issue as well. Mr. Torres.
Thank you. General Nakasone, the United States is a cyber superpower. Do you consider China a comparable cyber superpower?
Congressman, I consider China a near-peer adversary, yes.
And what is the likelihood of China outcompeting the United States in cyberspace?
Given the attention that we're putting on this today, the realization that our nation must change, the strategic environment that it must change, our national defense strategy, our national security strategy, I think we will maintain that superiority.
A reassuring answer. During World War II, the United States was concerned that Nazi Germany would be the first to develop an atomic bomb. Today, we're concerned that China could be the first to develop a quantum computer capable of breaking modern encryption. Director Easterly, who's winning the quantum computing arms race?
I would probably ask General Nakasone to weigh in on that specifically.
Congressman, you point out one of the critical things that we're moving towards right now. Our agency creates the keys, codes, and cryptography that ensures the underlying encryption of our nation. We are developing those keys, codes, and cryptography in partnership with NIST to ensure that our nation is safe from a quantum computer, which you described. National Security Memorandum 10 talks about this. We are well on the way to being able to do that, and we will be able to defeat any type of quantum capability that the Chinese have in the future.
So we're winning the race?
We are.
Great. Artificial intelligence, there's a real risk that advanced AI could enable anyone, anywhere to carry out a cyber attack on critical infrastructure. What can be done to prepare ourselves for a world of widely distributed cyber weapons of mass destruction?
This is an area where I have significant concerns because AI is moving faster. It is moving at a speed that is 3 times the speed of Moore's Law. It is unpredictable, and it will probably be the most powerful weapon of our generation. Most powerful weapon of the last generation was owned and operated by nations who are disincentivized to use it. These are generally owned and operated and produced by private sector companies who are driven by a profit motive. So we need to be very specific about the guardrails and ultimately the type of regulation that will help prevent the use of these capabilities for nefarious purposes by rogue nations, by cyber criminals, by terrorists. And we need to move incredibly quickly to do that. I think this and China are the 2 generational issues that we need to be riveted on to protect our nation.
And as you noted, AI development is largely unfolding among a small number of companies, secretly behind the scenes, and I think most of us, even in Congress, are out of the loop. Do you feel like these companies are keeping you abreast of the latest advances in AI and the implications that those advances would have for cybersecurity?
Well, I think one of the good news story is because of the illumination of this issue and the inherent risks by the Congress, by the administration, industry has had to come to the table and actually work in a more transparent way, which we greatly appreciate. But we need to see more of that. And frankly, we need to have secure guidelines in place. There needs to be secure by design for AI, which is why we've been working with all the big generative AI companies and international partners to ensure that when these capabilities are created, security is the top priority.
Now, there are multiple leaders, the CISA director, national cyber director, the deputy national security advisor for cyber and emergency technology, the head of cybercom, who play a role in setting cyber policy. And there are multiple law enforcement agencies, FBI, Secret Service, Homeland Security investigations, that play a role in combating cyber crimes like ransomware. Who is in charge of coordinating the various moving parts of cyber policy making and law enforcement?
Statutorily, it's the Office of the National Cyber Director that serves that purpose, sir.
And how does your role differ from that of the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies? What's the difference between those 2 roles?
The National Security Council writ large yields all mechanisms of national power, and cyber is but one. So when the NSC provides guidance and advice to the president, it's far broader than cyber. Our domain is on...
No, but there's a deputy NSA specifically for cyber, so how does that role differ from yours?
We work very closely together, but the big difference is there is more of an operational flavor to that role than my role. Again, our office is providing strategic and policy guidance, not operational guidance, which is what the National Security Council does with our colleagues. Again, far broader than cyber, but more operational than the Office of the National Cyber Director. But I also want to be real clear that we work very closely together. Literally, weekly, we have a sync, leader to leader, but our staffs are working together daily.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Downson.
Director Easterly, Director Ray, I just want to have a conversation with the 2 of you, largely around the maritime, the port situation. It seems to me that our ports are becoming more reliant on equipment, technology, infrastructure from PRC-affiliated firms. I find that concerning. Is that a legitimate threat?
Yes.
So I think it's a good example of the theme that we've been talking about in this hearing in other contexts as well, right? Which is if you're talking about Chinese businesses, there is the potential that they can be leveraged by the Chinese government for all manner of concerns. When you combine that with some of the cybersecurity concerns that have also been discussed here in the context of ports and maritime security, it's sort of a double whammy.
Yeah, I mean, these supply chains, of course, are so interconnected and so heavily reliant upstream and downstream. It doesn't take very much hitch and a giddy up to start to strangle our ability to engage in international trade or to power the American economy. How do you assess the awareness of our maritime partners, the port operators, shippers, carriers, about this threat?
Yeah, so one of the issues, and you may be alluding to this, sir, is that 80% of cranes in our ports are ZPMC. So it goes to the point about Chinese-controlled infrastructure in our critical infrastructure. Part of the issue is, and we work very closely with the Coast Guard, who serve as the Sector Risk Management Agency for Maritime Transportation Systems, we make all of the owners and operators aware of the very real threat and the risk. But when you have such almost a monopoly in a manufacturer, it's very hard to rip and replace. Same concerns with the communications infrastructure. So what we do is we provide, working with the Coast Guard, information on the threat, and we provide what they can do to mitigate the impact of that threat. So there are things that can be done to lessen that risk, but of course we should work to be able to not have to depend on this type of Chinese infrastructure, which ultimately is controlled by the CCP.
Well, and you're exactly right, and I think that's worth double underlining that 80% of the ship-to-shore cranes are manufactured by PRC-affiliated firms. It does seem like that is quite a liability, all things being considered. Director Ray, more to add on that front?
Well, I would agree with both your comments and Director Easterly's. I would just add that it's about more than just the ports and the cranes. Maritime sector more broadly is something that we know the Chinese have targeted, and that's part of why, together with CISA and Coast Guard and others, we've tried to put out a lot of information about best practices, mitigation guidance, et cetera, to try to reduce the risk, but ultimately, if we're going to be in a more secure posture, we're going to have to be mindful of the Chinese government's ability to leverage its businesses.
So let's assume that y'all are doing everything right. You've done a good job educating these private sector partners because so much of this infrastructure, as we've talked about, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, and now we're talking about ports, really is owned and operated by the private sector. Let's assume you've done a perfect job of educating them. What do you assess they need to do better over the course of the next 3 to 5 years to minimize the dangers of this threat?
I'm happy to start. One other thing I would mention, FBI and CISA actually put out something specific about Chinese manufactured drones, which is another area we have significant concerns in. But in terms of what they need to do, it goes back to ensuring that they have an awareness of the threat environment and that they are taking those measures to invest in basic cyber hygiene. Some of this are just taking the basics to understand your infrastructure, to know what the vulnerabilities are, so you can drive remediation of them. That cyber hygiene is so important. I made the point in the opening statement, but I really think it's worth doubling down. Every CEO, every board member, every business leader of a critical infrastructure owner or operator has to see cyber risk as a core business risk. They have to manage it as a matter of good governance and national security. So that's an important message to anybody that leads an organization in this nation.
I would just add to those very good points that much as Director Easterly referred to in her opening statement, same thing in the context of ports and maritime security more broadly, we need victims to reach out to us immediately, because the victim who reaches out to us immediately is the one who's going to supply the information that will enable us not just to be able to share information with them to better mitigate and prevent their attack from becoming worse, but more importantly, in many ways, prevent the attack from metastasizing to other sectors and other businesses. So the first victim that gets contacted, that victim's information is the one that helps us protect all the other organizations and victims that are potentially out there. And so we see all the time, when it's done right, businesses reaching out to their local FBI field office. We're able to be there often within an hour or just a little bit more, sharing technical indicators that they wouldn't have had. The dots get connected. They're better able to prevent that attack from getting worse, but then they're also able to share intelligence, which enables us collectively to then arm other businesses and other ports, let's say in this case, from being victims and getting further left of boom.
Mr. Chair, I would close by noting that we have hyper-optimized these supply chains for efficiency, but we cannot leave resilience behind, including, of course, cyber. Thanks.
Noted.
I yield.
Mr. Auchincloss.